Are you looking to learn more about investing in the central Indiana real estate market? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Indy Real Estate Investing Podcast with T&H Realty, where we discuss all things related to investing in the central Indiana real estate market. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Indy Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Tallman with T&H Realty. We are a residential property management company that services the central Indiana market. For today's episode, I've brought back Jake Knight to the show. Jake's our business development manager. Welcome back to the podcast, Jake.
Hey, what's going on? How we doing?
Good. How's your summer been?
I love the heat. So I'm having a great summer. Yeah, it's been
you
hot.
Had a lot of it.
Yeah. So obviously I don't look forward to winter, and so I'm enjoying every minute of it.
Yeah, it's been a nice week so far, but extremely hot weather. I don't think we're unique to the country. There's been a lot of heat going on. So, Jake, I brought you on here not to talk about the weather, but to talk about some best practices when converting a personal residence into a rental home. We've talked about this a lot, both you and I, and as a company, because we're seeing this, what we call a persona, kind of like this lead flow into our system more and more. It's those people, again, that want to convert their personal residence into a rental property for whatever reason. And again, I thought it'd make sense to bring you back on the podcast and talk about some best practices for doing that. In fact, I did a podcast on this, Jake, back. I went and looked back. It was in February of 24, and the title of it was, "My interest rate's so low, should I convert my primary residence into a rental?" Because we were starting to feel it back then a little bit. And I think it's not crazy amount of people coming into our system with this type of lead, but there's enough of them. I thought it, again, made sense to bring you back on and talk about, again, some best practices. So let's get into it, Jake. When we think about this persona, again, I'll call it, we kind of put them in two different groups. Okay. So we call them intentional and we call them reluctant, depending on the kind of the feel you get from them. So explain what we mean by that for the listeners.
Yeah, true. And yeah, they're truly two different types of investors. In some respects, they think completely differently. The reluctant landlord was somebody that had no intention of renting their property out. They probably wanted to sell it. I actually talked to a guy this morning. He's had his house for sale for some amount of time, I think 6 months, and he's at a dead end. It's just sitting vacant. He's not living there, and he wants to figure out some kind of way he can or have some kind of income stream on it. And so renting is kind of the natural avenue that people explore for that. But they didn't really go into this thinking that this was going to be an investment property. So they don't have that mindset of a traditional investor to think that I need to invest in this property so I can find a renter to live in it. The other type is intentional, and it's kind of the opposite, where they buy the property, they have a plan for it, and they might live in it for a certain period of time and then convert it to an investment property. And so they have more of an investor mindset with it. And their long-term plan was not for this to be their forever home. It was to possibly occupy it for a short period of time, potentially flip it in some cases. Sometimes that happens. And then rent it out. So they're more like a traditional investor that we work with that fits other persona groups than the reluctant landlord that is basically just trying to put a fix on their issue temporarily.
Yeah. So you mentioned you had a call today with what we call reluctant. They're at the end of their rope, right? Basically. And to be frank, those aren't always our best clients, right? Because they're a bit desperate, and we're kind of like that last hope for them. A lot of them are forced into situations where they have to have a certain amount of dollar for rent, or it just doesn't work out. So it's interesting you had one of those calls today. I think more of them, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I would guess more of them come into the mindset of, I want to rent this property. Like I'm doing it. That's what we call them intentional. Like they're intentionally saying, maybe they didn't go into it. Maybe they didn't buy the house with the intent of saying, in 3 years, I'm going to rent this property. But for whatever reason, they're making a move because that's why they're calling us, because they're thinking about converting it. And they want to make it a rental property. So, Jake, there's plenty of benefits. When people think about, hey, I can be a landlord. Maybe I want to be a landlord. I mean, you get recurring income, you get tax benefits, there's appreciation and inflation hedging. But what are some of the things when you talk to someone, whether they're intentional or even more so reluctant, what are the things that you talk to them about to ensure that they're really ready to be a landlord?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You don't visit elementary schools and hear kids shouting out that they want to be a landlord when they grow up, typically. Yeah, it's a firefighter, police officer, actor, professional athlete. But look, the big thing is mindset. You got to think of this thing as a small business. And we want every investor client to have that same mindset so we're on the same page. And with a personal residence, it's got a personal element to it sometime. People can have attachments to the property. They could have raised kids there. You kind of have to move away from that type of mindset if you're going to create this business aspect to the property, because it's no longer your personal residence. It's an investment property. It's a rental. It's going to be somebody else's home. We want the house to reflect that, not have. And look, it's not to say a house can't have a personality. Some houses, in some cases, can have personalities, and that benefits the house, depending on what we're talking about. Some kind of unique quality to it. However, we typically kind of look at things, and we want to broaden the amount of people that will go into this property and want to rent it. So these are things that are common, like paint colors. Should you have every wall a different color, a different vibrant color, even pink, purple, red? These are things that some people are going to walk into that house and not like that. And we don't always get the feedback. They might not tell us anything, and they just won't simply apply for it. And those are the things that we want to try to avoid. We want to put a good product out, and part of that is the mindset. So getting everybody on the same page initially when we move forward, we decide to do this, they decide to do this, that they have that kind of business-minded, small business mindset to getting the property, not only an investment into the property to get it into that condition, but that kind of ongoing, because with any rental property, there's a continued investment. And that's the big thing with some investors. They don't want to invest any more into this property. They just want to sell it if they're reluctant. So that's a huge red flag. If I'm talking to somebody and they say, hey, I don't have any money I don't have any money that I can put into it, or I don't want to put any more money into it. Well, I'm sorry. That's just not the nature of owning a property, right?
Right.
You got to invest in these things.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we can't predict this stuff, right? So, of course, water heater can go out next week, and you just need to be prepared for stuff like this, and just the educational element of that. So, it's really more of a mindset thing.
Yeah. When I think about that mindset and small business owner, there's a few things that, and we've done a lot of content on this, but it's really educating themselves, right? Just understanding the ins and outs of being a landlord. There's a great book out there. We can put it in the show notes called Rental Property Investing. It's by a guy named Brandon Turner, who was affiliated with Bigger Pockets, but it's like a step-by-step playbook of beginning to end of being a landlord. Now, there may be things specifically for this persona, because I think it talks about selecting your realtor and buying the home and analyzing deals. That's not necessary for this persona group. They already have the home. It's there. But it really does go through some ins and outs and the, frankly, trials and tribulations of being a landlord. But also just not educating yourself as building your team, getting a lawyer engaged, making sure your tax situation is right. There's insurance considerations. You got to convert that, basically your fire policy, your home insurance to it's called a rental dwelling policy is what it's called.
Right.
property tax issues are going to happen. That's something to really be informed about, because your taxes will likely double when it becomes a rental property. You're going to lose your homestead exemption. And then, as you mentioned, really establishing those reserves for when that water heater, as you mentioned, goes out, or a furnace goes out, or even we've talked more recently about like establishing a line of credit to be able to use. You're not necessarily tying up capital, but you have money that you can draw from if you need to. So yeah, as you mentioned, it's mindset. It's really getting into that mindset of this shouldn't be looked at as a nuisance, where reluctant people may view it as a nuisance, like this thing will just never go away and I can't sell it, so I'm going to try to do this, and I'm going to resist everything about being a landlord if I'm reluctant, as opposed to I'm doing this intentionally. I look at my resident as a customer, and it should be a mutually beneficial setup for that customer. But you mentioned this a little bit before, but let's get into some very specific. So you make the decision, I want to rent this property. You're getting into the mindset. You're getting your team established. You're educating yourself, like I said, and just this, I'm doing this. Talk about property preparation, because this may surprise some people, but I'll make the statement here and say, I think your property needs to be in better shape for a resident than it does when you sell it. And that may put people back on their heels a little bit, but I think there's a lot of, again, just a lot of experience I have doing both. And I'm going to argue you have to get the property in better shape to rent it. Talk about some of the things that we see pretty common, where people really have to step up their game and prep the property the right way.
Yeah. Well, listen, and actually, this is a great segue, because I was going to mention the cost of things. But one persona group might be more short term than the other, right? You know, the intentional is going to be more long term. Reluctance probably going to be more short term, unless they start renting their property out and they have a great time doing it and they want to keep doing it. But that doesn't always happen. But the main thing, the very first thing that we talk about is removing all personal belongings. They're living in the property currently. We don't do furnished. I don't find for a lot of long-term rentals that you see furnished properties. Obviously, it's extremely common in short-term and potentially mid-term, but not long-term. Our residents have their own stuff. So, and I'm not talking about appliances. Anything that's plugged in or bolted in, you leave. But personal belongings need to be removed.
That includes stuff even like a grill, right? We don't want grills there. Like it's like, people say, the tenant may want to use it. No, get your stuff. They don't want your stuff. Very likely they don't want your stuff.
I hear that. And patio furniture. But I also hear probably more than anything where it's like, they think that they're being nice by wanting to leave a lawnmower and lawn equipment. And I totally understand why they would not want to move all that stuff with them. They might not even need it wherever they're going. But ideally, whatever we include with a rental, we are going to want to repair or replace if it goes out. But we don't want to be calling our clients to say, hey, we need to buy a new lawnmower. This thing went out. Yeah. Then there's an obvious liability to stuff like that too, right? And not just the cost. But so on that, we want to basically have the house in a good condition, a good functional condition. We want health and safety items to be up to code. We want any maintenance issues to be addressed. We want the house to hum. That way, as soon as the tenant moves in, they're having a good experience. I think the last thing we want from a property management perspective is a work order the first week that they're there. That probably means we missed something, and that's not a great experience for the tenant either.
Right.
Along with that, aesthetics. How does the home look? How should it look? Neutral wall or neutral paint colors on walls, flooring in good condition. These are things that everybody notices when they go look at a property. And so, in some ways, we don't want them to really notice the paint at all. But you don't really want it to really stand out.
Right.
So,
good point.
Yeah. And obviously, the cleaning element to it, where you want the house to appear clean, but you also want it to smell clean. I know that we've all walked into properties that have an odor, whether that's some kind of smoke or if it smells damp. And these things all affect the perspective that somebody has on a property. And it's always probably something pretty small. If they don't want to rent it, it's something small that they didn't like about our house, but not something big. So we just want to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure we're putting the best product forward.
Yeah. We can put a link to this in our show notes too, but something we give out pretty often, and I know it's been kind of a working process, and I think it's a great resource, is our property standards checklist. It's on our website. We don't hide it. In fact, we share it with potential clients just to make sure they're on board with what we expect out of a rental property. If there's people out there thinking about renting their home and think they may want to self-manage, have at it, because I think it's a great resource. It's been tried and tested and used a whole lot. And it's kind of our guiding light to make sure that we prep the property the right way, because we do want that to be a very good experience, safe, clean environment for the resident to live in. So, Jake, I'm just curious, and maybe I should talk about this at the beginning, but I'll circle back here. Like, what are the main reasons? And let's talk about, you talked about reluctant already, because we know the main reason reluctant generally wants to rent their properties, they can't sell it. Right. And again, in full transparency, back when we started this back in 2007, 2008, I've talked about on this podcast before, that was our main source of business. In fact, we put on our cars and on our letterhead, we had letterhead back in the day, can't sell it, let us rent it. That was our hook to try to get people in, because back then people had a really hard time selling their home, and it was how we built a lot of our business to start with. But now we're seeing people doing this a little differently. Back then it was solely because they couldn't sell, almost always. But now, as we mentioned, people are coming into it and saying, I want to rent it because I think it might make sense for me to rent it. I'm doing this intentionally. What are the main drivers there from the people that are doing it intentionally?
They have a low interest rate on their house. Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing. And they're never going to see a 3%, 4% interest rate again, probably. So they're holding on to that thing tight. You know, it just makes all the sense in the world. So that is the main thing. I mean, they are transparent about it. I got this interest rate on this house, and if they don't want to sell it, some of them might not know if they're going to move it. They might want to try to move into it again. We've had some people that moved to the West Coast with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they don't know how that's going to work out long term. Hey, let's keep my Broad Ripple property just in case, unrented out year to year, and take it from there. Oh, by the way, I got a really good rate on it, and I don't want to give that up. That's the number one thing. So we've had some people too. I mean, we've had some pretty cool stories with people doing this. I mean, we had a client several years ago that was kind of moving city to city, and I believe he was buying duplexes, and it was kind of, or it was even more of a house hack. We'd live in the property for a little while, fix it up. If it was a duplex, he'd move to the other side, do the same thing, and rent out each side as he finished, and then move on to another property in the city or a different city and do it. And man, I always thought that was really cool. I mean, if you want to travel and be a real estate investor and kind of live in a city temporarily, you know what I mean, temporarily, maybe a year or two,
right?
That's a cool way to do it if you can do it. And obviously, I don't believe that he had a big family he was moving with. He was probably a single guy.
I don't think it'd be possible. Probably, I don't think you'd be married very long if you continually moved like every year. But
you'd have to find the right person, right? Yeah. But yeah, I always thought that was pretty cool. We have some other people that are living in one side of a duplex, and they just don't want to be a property manager or landlord, and so. They don't mind living next to their tenant, but they don't want the tenant to know that they own the property either. They don't want to be bothered by it. So they kind of neighbor up with them. We also have people that, well, this is probably the coolest one. I'm going to quit my job. I'm doing really well, and I'm going to travel the world for a couple of years, you know, and they don't have any intention of moving. They just want to travel for a while, and they're not going to be here. It doesn't make sense for the property to just sit vacant. Why not earn some income on it and have my renter help me pay down my mortgage or pay it down for the full month. So, what we've seen recently, I think the mindset of at least covering the cost of the overall fees, the mortgage fees, taxes, stuff like that. If you can get your fees covered or close to it, most people are happy to do it. And they're not exactly seeing cash flow on it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Principal pay down is a big thing for investors.
Yeah, it's an interesting segue because I'll touch real quick. I mentioned the podcast I did back in February of 24 about this, and it was, if that's the only reason you're doing this, don't do it. The interest rate being, like, if the only reason you're renting your home is because you have a very low interest rate, that is not a good way to think about this. But if you're thinking, but it could be the catalyst for it, though. It could be like, hey, I have this great interest rate. And it's almost like this fear of this FOMO fear, right? It's your fear of missing out. Like, I don't want to lose this mortgage. Like, I don't want to lose it, or this interest rate, I should say. But the bigger picture for me is making sure, again, getting in the mindset that I'm going to be a landlord. Okay, maybe you work a 9-to-5 job, but all of a sudden you're a business owner, and you have to be able to make that mental switch, the mindset, to saying, now I'm a landlord and I have a customer, and that's the resident. Particularly if you self-manage, right? It's going to be, you're going to have interface with that customer. So again, it can be the spark that kind of starts the fire of being a landlord. You have a really good interest rate, but you need to make sure you check off all those other boxes and really treat it like a business. And Jake, you'd mentioned this, and maybe you can expound on it a little bit, is when people come into our system, like let's say the traditional investor, like, hey, I own in some different markets and I Googled and I found your webpage and says you guys work with investors, and their first thing mostly, if you talk to our brokerage, although I think it's getting a little better now, is I have to cash flow. I have certain cash flow expectations that have to be met, which is very challenging in this market. Okay, with higher interest rates, with higher sales prices, cash flow is getting squeezed from, and we've talked a lot about it on this podcast. What are you hearing? Maybe expound on kind of what are you hearing, or what are you telling people that are renting their personal residence, kind of what to expect, like what kind of return they can expect, or like what kind of conversations around that are you having?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors there, because the biggest thing, we just don't know what turnover cost is going to be on a home from year to year. And that's a big expense. We can talk about rent. You can talk about taxes. These things are going to stay pretty steady for the most part. And we all know I attended a Berkshire Hathaway event. I believe it was just this past year. The CEO was talking about the appreciation value since 2018, the 12% a year every year. Yeah. And we all know the rent did not appreciate with the right. For sale value. So now you have this huge gap because there's your cash flow. That's why it disappeared. Of course, homeowners are happy, about that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of one of those things where you just have to have that right mindset that it's cash flow is not the only reason to do this. But this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. Scheme's not the right word for it. But, this is a long-term wealth-building exercise. You want to be in this for the long term. And that way you can really hit your appreciation gains, and you get a big return on the back end. And I wouldn't be so focused on the exact numbers that you're going to cash flow month to month. Of course, everything's important. But as a long-term investor, you didn't go in with the mindset of doing this for a year or two. Yeah, I mean, you've owned your properties for over 20 years, right?
I have. Yep.
You built quite a nest egg with that, and you could speak to better than I can on how much your properties have appreciated. Yeah, I'd be jealous of the numbers you tell me that you bought these properties for in the early 2000s. So, yeah, and this is an affordable market, but we see and we think the appreciation values are going to fall closer to the national average, which is about 5%, I believe, this year and the coming years. And that's a pretty consistent number, right? We always know the properties are going to appreciate. So That's kind of the big thing that stands out.
Yeah, I would, again, I argue that cash flow is, again, very difficult. Scott and I never bought our properties thinking that, well, maybe we did initially, but we quickly learned we were never going to be able to support ourselves on rental income, not with leverage. And so that's just an expectation. And assuming that people are using their interest rate as the catalyst, they have a mortgage, right? They're making payments every month, so they don't owe them free and clear. But you had mentioned like a 5% appreciation rate. And let me just kind of throw this. I was thinking about this example yesterday, and you kind of prompted me to think to talk about it here. And I think breaking even is perfectly fine. I think even losing a little money every year is okay. And let me, and people may say, that sounds insane. Why would you do that? Well, let me ask you this. If, let's say that it costs, let's say you convert your personal residence into a rental home. And let's say that you had some startup costs, you had to do some painting, flooring, whatever. And the first full year that you owned it, let's say you lost $2,500. Okay, that doesn't sound great, but it's probably very realistic that could happen. That probably happens all the time when people do this. But what if I also said that you gained $15,000 of wealth that year? Now, it's not hitting your bank account. I get it. It's almost like, think about it more of someone putting $15,000 into a retirement account for you that you can't access quite yet. All right. Some of us more sooner than others. But that's what it is. And essentially, if you're getting 5% on, let's say it's a $300,000 property, which is probably a lot of the types of personal residences we're getting converted into rentals, 5% of $300,000 is $15,000 a year. So who would not do that? Who would not spend $2,500 to make $15,000? Right? It just makes total sense to me. But yeah, and I just think it's hard to think about that because you don't actually see the cash, right? It's all theoretical. It's on a pro forma somewhere where you're keeping track of your property value. So it could be a hard argument to make, but I think it's pretty accurate to what could actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a great way to think about it. So that's the kind of mindset that we're referring to on the front end of the podcast, is having that long-term mindset. And you did talk about, and I spoke on this, the catalyst for them wanting to do it is good. Yeah, that's the reason for wanting to do it. But we still have the education element on, hey, this is what the environment of being a landlord looks like. This is what you have to be prepared for, because you do have to have that continued investment mindset. But if you look at the big picture, the numbers look pretty darn good. If you're at 5%, you take that year to year, 5% each year. Then year two, you're 30.
That's right.
Year 3, 45.
Yeah.
The numbers start looking better and better the more you go up, right?
Yeah. Well, this has been good. We do have a lot of other resources on this. We kind of touched just on like property preparation, kind of the team you need to build and the things you need to do to kind of get set up. And we do have an ebook on this. I'll have Brooke link to that as well in our show notes. I think it's literally called, how to convert your personal residence into a rental home. It's pretty straightforward.
Pretty self-explanatory. Yep.
Yeah, but it's going to talk about a lot of the content we talked about today with links out to other things on our website. Because, look, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think if someone is sitting on a really good interest rate and assuming they have a very good mindset that says, I'm doing this intentionally, I'm not doing it out of distress or as a last hope, then I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Keep that really nice interest rate, but just also understand there's other things that come along with that. That being a landlord can be difficult. There's going to be tough years, going to be some good years, but there's nothing wrong with owning a piece of rental real estate over a long period of time. I don't think there's anything you can do but go up. So, well, Jake, thanks for being here.
Totally.
I appreciate your time.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
We hope everyone has picked up some information that will help them in their investing. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another podcast. In the meantime, we encourage you to share this podcast with your investing friends. Leave us a review and don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and please stay invested in your investment.